Okay, picture this. What happens when a student, who's, let's be honest, known for struggling in school, especially with something like literature, decides he's going to aim for the most competitive high school around,
And not only aims for it.
but actually gets in?
Yeah,
And how does a really expensive bicycle fit into this whole improbable story?
that's the kicker, isn't it?
Okay, let's get into it. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into some fascinating source material. It's an excerpt from the audiobook Triumphant.
Which translates roughly to The Golden Flower Garden by Mingreen Knott.
And our mission here is to really unpack this personal narrative. We want to pull out the surprising facts, the motivations behind the scenes, the relationships, which are pretty complex,
Oh, yeah.
and those kind of aha moments that make this seemingly unlikely success story so, well, compelling.
The world he describes is really tangible, a small town vibe, a family. Complicated, but definitely present.
And this really deep passion for flowers, almost an obsession.
Right alongside that constant struggle with schoolwork, it's quite a contrast.
So let's start there with that unexpected passion.
Yeah.
The flower gardening. I mean, this kid, struggling academically, is incredibly dedicated to his garden.
He paints a picture, doesn't he? Early mornings, the mist, his neighbor Thao nearby.
And the colors. Mostly yellow roses, marigolds, gladiolus, dahlias, chrysanthemums. It sounds like they dominate.
They do, but then you get these splashes of other colors, too. Pink and purple carnations, those coxcomb marigolds he calls carrot-colored.
And roses and pink, white, red, even this incense smoke color he mentions. He actually calls the garden Trihovong.
The Golden Flower Garden. And how he got into it is interesting, too. Learned from a friend's dad, apparently a well-known flower artisan, won awards and everything.
What's really striking, though, is the intensity of this hobby.
Yeah, it wasn't just casual. I mean, the lengths he went to fund it.
He admits to stealing money, right, from his mother's cash drawer at her drink stand because it was unlocked.
Which, was bound to end badly.
Oh, definitely. His father caught him. Led to a really severe beating.
The description is intense. Pain reached the sky, he says. Jokes his backside would have been flattened like pressed bananas.
If his mother hadn't intervened, yeah. But her reaction is the twist here.
Right. It wasn't just anger. Once she realized he stole for the flowers, she felt pity, and then she started secretly giving him money.
She actually preferred this hobby, didn't she? Over him, like, getting into trouble.
Exactly. She saw it as better than playing billiards, forming gangs, fighting, the usual stuff kids might get up to.
Which is such a stark contrast to his father's view, at least initially.
Totally. The father just saw it as useless, pointless.
Though that did soften a tiny bit later.
Just a bit. After the narrator managed to sell some flowers and use the money for school books and a bag for his sister Chow, so maybe not totally useless in his eyes then.
It really makes you think about those family dynamics, the strict dad, the, well, maybe enabling mom, how those differing views shape what you pursue.
Absolutely. And speaking of family, that father figure is so central to the story.
The narrator really paints a picture of his dad's personality through their interactions, those shifting moods.
Yeah, 1 minute maybe admiring the garden, the next furious about grades.
And the nicknames. Calling him Sungdo-bo, Buffalo Head, specifically because he did poorly in school.
Ouch. And the rules about friends were incredibly strict.
Basically no hanging out. He called it coupling up or wandering around lazily.
The punishment wasn't just talk, threatening to tear your pants off and kick you out.
And he actually did tear his pants once, just for playing billiards.
Wow. That level of strictness must have really shaped his social life.
Hugely. It meant his friends were, understandably, pretty scared of his dad.
There was an exception, though, for the neighbor down.
Right, because she was the same age as his sister Chow and lived right next door. Seen as less of a risk, maybe.
But his other friends, like Kung, they even had a nickname for the father.
Ongjahak, the dark old man.
Tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it?
It really does. They were so afraid they wouldn't even use the front door.
They'd sneak around the alley to the back fence just to see him in the garden.
We also get a little context about the schools in town. His was Trinquacton, known for, let's say, less academically inclined students.
Then there was Trần Cao Vân, the really prestigious one everyone wanted to get into, and Hon Tu Kung, sort of the middle ground, less competitive.
There were even rivalries, fights between students from Trần Cao Vân and Hon Tu Kung.
Yet somehow, the narrator and Kung stayed friends, even when they ended up at different schools later. That bond was strong.
Okay, so this brings us to the really interesting part. the academic struggle. Because the narrator is incredibly frank about it.
No kidding. He calls himself not smart, dull-witted, says he was weak year after year.
Usually worst or second worst in his class. That's pretty blunt.
And his absolute weakest subject, literature.
Completely clueless, he says. Never scored above a 4. Usually a 3, sometimes even a 0.
A 0. Huh. So naturally, his father tried to step in, made him read books.
Yes, which leads to this pretty funny story in hindsight. Instead of literature books.
He rented martial arts novels.
And spent his study time practicing moves, making his dad think he was studying literature.
Classic. But probably not great for the grades.
Not at all. His scores dropped even lower, which led to more, shall we say, deep and fierce physical punishment.
That's when the cactus bush incident happened, right? A straight kick to the butt, landing him in cacti.
Exactly. So given this whole history, the terrible grades, especially in literature, the cactus incident, how on earth does applying to Trần Cao Vân, the top school, even become a thing?
This is where the real motivation kicks in. It's all about the bicycle.
The bicycle. Tell us about it.
It's described as this amazing bike, new, expensive, and imported sports model, the last, it was called.
And super rare in their town, only about 10 of them.
Apparently. His father bought it 2 years earlier when the narrator was in 8th grade, and he made a deal.
The deal was?
The bike was his reward if, and it's a big if, he passed the 10th grade entrance exam, specifically into Trần Cao Vân.
Wow. That's a high bar.
Immense. And the father kept the bike locked up, cleaned it meticulously, but never let anyone rout it.
His friends started calling it the golden medal.
Apt, right? But the narrator's reaction, pure despair.
He thought it was impossible. Like picking the moon, he says.
Felt agony seeing the bike every day, unable to touch it, said it was more painful than receiving dozens of physical blows.
So initially, he just resigned himself to going to the other school, Huỳnh Thu Cang. He gave up on the bike.
Pretty much. He was ready to let the golden medal dream go, but then his friends got involved.
And their motivation, well, it wasn't purely altruistic, was it?
Not entirely, according to him. He says they really wanted to ride the golden medal themselves.
To parade around to impress the girls? Gotta love teenage motivations.
So after the 9th grade exams finished, they launched a plan. Kung brought study materials.
And Phu Ga, he was a good student.
Yeah.
Right? The dad actually tolerated him.
Yeah, Phu Ga volunteered to tutor him, which is kind of funny because the dad probably didn't know Kung himself wasn't even applying to Trần Cao Vân.
But the tutoring sounds like it was rough.
Oh, yeah. Phu Ga apparently got super frustrated, especially with the literature, telling the narrator, your head is messed up, or it's like your head just exasperated.
Which led them to a kind of Hail Mary strategy.
Totally last ditch. Phu Ga suggested just memorizing answers from a prep book. There were 30 topics.
Just rote memorization. And Suing loved the idea.
Enthusiastically approved. Good idea, I approve. But how did the memorization actually go?
Well, he tried. But out of 30 topics, he could only manage to cram 17.
Only 17. Still, it shows that external push, right? Friends wanting to ride the bike, pushing him, even with this slightly crazy method.
Definitely. So exam day comes.
And incredibly, the literature question was similar enough to one of those 17 topics he'd memorized.
Pure luck. So he could write quickly.
Finished really early, apparently surprised everyone else, but the relief didn't last long.
No. Afterwards, he heard talk that the answer needed some specific modifications he hadn't included.
Panic sets in. He's convinced he failed.
So he comes up with an escape plan. Literally.
Yeah, to evade, run and hide at his grandmother's house out in the countryside. To avoid his father's wrath when the results came out.
He even asked his sister Chow to check the results for him and report back.
And the waiting sounds like torture. He describes counting falling leaves, feeling hot as fire inside.
After 10 days with no word from Chow, he'd pretty much given up hope. Started thinking about life as a cowherd.
Seriously,
Right.
Imagine that. 10 days of anxiety, thinking you've failed, planning your escape, and then...
The arrival. It sounds so dramatic. Cousin and Fu bursting into his grandma's house like a storm.
And the news.
You passed, Chien. Exactly 10.5 points.
His first reaction was disbelief, right? He thought they were lying.
Yeah, he figured Chow would have told him sooner if it were true.
But there was a reason for the delay. The school posted the results late.
And Chow was actually getting ready to go find him when the friends showed up. They decided they'd deliver the news.
Thinking it would be easier for friends to persuade him it was real and get him to come home.
Now, the score breakdown is fascinating
Oh,
here.
it really is. Math, 5 points. Literature, 5.5 points.
Think about that. Literature. His absolute worst subject, the one he got a 0 in.
Scored higher than math, which he was supposedly decent at.
He was shocked. He says something like, even dogs will know how to wear pants. It was that unbelievable to him.
It just shows that crazy memorization strategy, it actually paid off big time, unexpectedly well.
And the homecoming.
Yeah.
Quite different from the escape he'd planned.
Oh, yeah. Welcomed like a hero, his father, the super strict one, threw a huge party.
As if I had passed a doctorate exam, is how he put it.
Incredible turnaround. And then, the moment he'd waited 2 years for.
A culmination. His father handed him the key to the bicycle, to the golden medal.
With apparently rare sweetness in his voice. From this moment on, this bike is yours.
He described just immense joy, believing he could never feel happiness that great again.
What a story. Honestly, pulled right from the source material, from, stealing money for flowers, failing literature spectacularly.
To mastering this brute force memorization technique and finally earning that golden medal.
It really gives you a glimpse into the weird, unexpected ways goals get set and sometimes achieved. So much influence from family, friends.
And even valuable objects like that bike.
It really makes you think about motivation, doesn't it? What was really driving him? Was it the abstract goal of getting into a good school?
Or was it that concrete, tangible, shiny bicycle, the golden medal he could see every day?
And what about everyone else's role? His mother's quiet support, maybe even enabling.
His friend's push, which was, partly self-interested, but ultimately crucial.
Even his father's incredibly demanding condition, it all kind of came together.
So here's something to think about. How often is the real motivation behind a big achievement something surprising, maybe something as simple, as tangible, as exciting as a golden medal bicycle?
And maybe, how does focusing on a reward like that, something you can almost touch, change the whole process of learning or striving for something really difficult?
We've only scratched the surface here, of course. There's so much more in Triumphant.
Definitely food for thought.
This has been The Deep Dive.